We are tracking a developing story that has moved rapidly from the back rooms of diplomatic negotiation to the front lines of economic warfare. Breaking news out of Washington confirms that the fragile truce between the United States and its northern neighbor has fractured. In a stunning reversal, President Donald Trump has upended the recently signed trade framework regarding Canada's commercial relationship with China. While the president had initially signaled support for the deal, he has now pivoted to a strategy of aggression, issuing fresh tariff threats that target the very core of the agreement. But while the headlines focus on political maneuvering and diplomatic insults, a far more dangerous crisis is brewing in the American heartland, one that most consumers are entirely unaware of. This isn't about steel, aluminum, or automotive parts. It is about the fundamental biology of survival. We are talking about a critical farming ingredient, a pink mineral salt, without which modern agriculture simply ceases to function. The United States relies on Canada for nearly 90% of this vital resource. Now, as new tariffs make this ingredient prohibitively expensive, American farmers are facing a financial precipice, and the shockwaves are destined to hit every family in the country at the grocery checkout line. To understand the severity of this threat, we must look beneath the soil. The substance in question is potash, a potassium-rich salt that acts as one of the three macronutrients essential for plant life, alongside nitrogen and phosphorus. It is the K in the NPK ratio printed on every bag of fertilizer. Potash is not optional. It is the biological regulator that allows a corn stalk to stand upright against a prairie wind, helps a soybean plant retain water during a scorching July drought, and drives the process of photosynthesis itself. Without it, yields collapse, plants wither, and food production scales down drastically. Here is the terrifying reality for American food security. The United States cannot feed itself without Canadian rock. The Fertilizer Institute reports that 85% to 90% of all potash imported into the U.S. comes from Canadian mines. This is a level of dependency that exceeds almost any other strategic resource, including oil or semiconductors. While the U.S. has historically sourced nearly all its needs from international markets, it has done so because geology is cruel. Potash deposits are not evenly distributed. They are concentrated in ancient, dried-up ocean beds that exist in only a few specific locations on Earth. And the mother lode lies just north of the border. Let's look at the numbers, because they paint a picture of absolute dominance. Deep beneath the flat, wheat-covered plains of Saskatchewan lies the Saudi Arabia of fertilizer. According to Natural Resources Canada, the country holds the world's largest potash reserves, approximately 1.1 billion tons in potassium oxide equivalent. To put that in perspective, Canada's reserves are roughly 5 times larger than those of the United States. But reserves are just potential. Production is power. In terms of actual output, Canada's mining scale is 36 times larger than that of the U.S. In 2023 alone, Canada accounted for more than 32% of global potash production and a staggering 41% of all global exports. The mines in Saskatchewan are underground cities, operating kilometers beneath the earth, churning out the pink gold that feeds the world. In contrast, the United States' domestic production is a shadow of its former self. A handful of aging facilities in Utah, New Mexico, and Michigan struggle to produce small quantities, and industry experts note that these mines are plagued by lower ore quality and higher extraction costs. They simply cannot scale up to meet the voracious appetite of the American Corn Belt. Canada supplies nearly 10% of the U.S. nitrogen needs and 20% of its sulfur, but for potash, it is the undisputed lifeline. This geological reality collided with political ideology in February 2025. In an attempt to force leverage, President Trump imposed a sweeping tariff on Canadian fertilizer imports. The levy initially hit the market at a punishing 25%. While pushback from panicked American agricultural groups eventually forced a reduction to 10%, the damage to the pricing structure was already done. The economics of fertilizer are sensitive. It is a commodity market where uncertainty alone drives inflation. The impact was immediate and brutal. The U.S. Import Price Index for chemical fertilizers, a key indicator of wholesale costs, spiked from 164.5 in December 2024 to 186.5 by September 2025. This wasn't a gradual rise, it was a vertical ascent. The prices paid index, which tracks the actual checks farmers write for their inputs, climbed to 149.9 in June 2025, a stark jump from 139.9 just a year prior. For a sector that operates on razor-thin margins, an 11% increase in the primary driver of operating costs is catastrophic. We analyzed the books of typical corn farmers, and the data is sobering. Fertilizer accounts for roughly 45% of a corn farmer's total operating expenses. Industry-wide, it represents between 30% and 45% of annual costs. Agriculture is a game of precision. Applying just the right amount of nutrient at the exact right time is the difference between a profitable harvest and a bankruptcy auction. With potash prices hovering around $450 per ton in early 2025, a full pass-through of a 25% tariff would add more than $100 to every ton. For a farm requiring hundreds of tons, that is a six-figure hit to the bottom line that simply cannot be absorbed. This brings us to the unique economic trap of the American farmer. Josh Linville, a vice president at StoneX and a leading expert in fertilizer markets, puts it bluntly: Canada holds all the cards. In many trade disputes, the exporter might absorb some of the tariff cost to keep their market share. But potash is different. It is an inelastic necessity. The Canadians know the Americans have nowhere else to go, so the full cost of the tariff is passed directly to the buyer. Domestic U.S. production is simply too small to offer any leverage or fill the supply gap. Bob Thompson, president of the Michigan Farmers Union, highlights the second half of this trap. Farmers are price takers, not price makers. When a factory faces higher steel costs, it raises the price of the car. When a farmer faces higher fertilizer costs, they cannot simply raise the price of corn. They sell their crops at the whim of the global commodities market. The Chicago Board of Trade dictates their revenue. They have no mechanism to recoup the tariff costs. As Bill Kennedson from Michigan State University explains, tariffs inevitably push input prices up while farm profits spiral down. This policy is hitting a sector that is already bleeding. U.S. agriculture is staring down the barrel of a severe income decline, with field crop producers facing the third consecutive year of downturns in corn prices. The cash reserves built up during the boom years are gone. The perfect storm of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and historically high natural gas prices had already pushed fertilizer costs to record highs. Farmers are tapped out. They have no cushion left to absorb a geopolitical trade war. Washington's counter-argument has been a promise of energy and resource independence. The USDA claims it has a plan to reshore fertilizer manufacturing. But in the world of mining, plans are not production. A proposed potash mine in Osceola County, Michigan, has been touted as a solution. It aims to eventually produce 800,000 tons per year, a drop in the bucket of total demand. But its future hangs on a $1.1 billion federal loan that only received conditional approval in January 2025. Even if the money flows tomorrow, sinking shafts and building processing plants takes years, not months. And what about the rest of the world? If not Canada, then who? The other major global titans of potash are Russia and Belarus. Given the current geopolitical climate, the sanctions regime, and the ongoing war in Ukraine, these are not reliable partners. Relying on Russian supply chains is a strategic non-starter. This leaves the U.S. with exactly one viable, secure, and high-volume partner: Canada. Nutrien, the world's largest single producer, operates 6 massive mines in Saskatchewan. In 2024, they moved 14.4 million metric tons of product to 40 countries. They are the engine of global agriculture. When President Trump threatened severe tariffs in December 2025 to boost U.S. production, industry groups sounded the alarm. Joe Jansen, an agricultural economist at the University of Illinois, warns that protectionism in this sector is a fallacy. Protecting a non-existent domestic industry by taxing the only viable import doesn't create jobs. It destroys farms. Any rise in U.S. output propelled by tariffs just means American producers are being shielded from competition while American farmers pay the bill. While Washington plays hardball, the Canadians are not sitting idle waiting for American permission to trade. They are diversifying. Companies like Nutrien have warned that tariffs will hurt Americans, not Canadians. Why? Because the world is hungry, the global population is growing, and soil nutrient depletion is a universal problem. Canadian producers are expanding their reach into Brazil, India, and Southeast Asia. Furthermore, the industry is doubling down on capacity. BHP's massive Jansen project in Saskatchewan is set to begin production in 2026, adding millions more tons to Canada's export capability. Canada is positioning itself as the indispensable superpower of food security. They have the reserves, the infrastructure, and the global customers. If the U.S. makes it difficult to sell south, the trains will simply move the product to Vancouver and onto ships bound for Asia. Ultimately, this story ends where it began, at the dinner table. The Fertilizer Institute is pleading for exemptions, calling Canadian potash critical infrastructure for U.S. agriculture. But if the administration persists with this trade war, the math is inescapable. With over 90% of supply imported, tariffs are a direct tax on the soil itself. When the cost of growing corn rises, the cost of feeding livestock rises. When livestock feed gets expensive, the price of beef, pork, poultry, and dairy climbs. High fructose corn syrup, a staple in processed foods, becomes costlier to produce. The inflation that begins in a Saskatchewan mine shaft ends in the American supermarket. We are witnessing a dangerous game of chicken, where one side controls the food supply and the other side is writing the tariff checks. For the American farmer, the margin for error is gone. And for the American family, the era of cheap food may be the next casualty of a trade war that ignored the geology of survival.